Hi friends, I invite you all to listen to a brand new story.
The first thing I noticed that evening wasn't the silence of the mountains or the sting of the wind, it was the snow. Not the soft, drifting kind that makes the world look gentle, but the kind that cuts sideways, carried by an eastern wind sharp enough to strip bark off trees. It whirled through the Rockies like a white curtain, burying trails, swallowing outlines of pines and cliffs until the world itself felt erased. I leaned on my old ski pole, boots sinking with each step, breath rising in short clouds that vanished instantly into the storm. At 67, my body had grown slower, heavier. My back was bent just enough to remind me of the years, and my face had been carved by wind and time like the bark of an old oak. My name is Walter Briggs. Once I had been chief ranger of this wilderness reserve. A man of rules and iron hands. That was before the fire. 15 years earlier, in one cruel July, lightning had split a ridge and the forest ignited. My son, Daniel, was 28, a freckled, smiling ecologist who believed every wounded tree could heal, every animal deserved saving. He was there that day. I was too. I nearly reached him before the flames swallowed the slope, but nearly doesn't count in the mountains. I buried him, and with him, I buried the man I used to be. Since then I'd lived in a cabin at the edge of the timberline, alone, just watching the forest instead of protecting it. I no longer interfered. I only checked for old traps left behind by careless hunters. I stopped believing in love. I stopped believing in miracles. That night I was trudging back from one of those checks. Just another weary evening. A fire, a tin mug of tea, maybe a few pages from a weathered book. That was all life had been reduced to. But fate doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it throws something into your path you can't ignore. Through the snow, at first I thought I saw two stumps in the middle of the trail. Shadows. Then the shadows moved. I squinted, and my heart stumbled. Two wolf pups stood directly in front of me. But it wasn't the fact that they stood there that froze me in place. It was how they stood. They weren't crouched or snarling, not trembling with fear. No. They were upright, balanced on their hind legs, their front paws pressed together as if in prayer. I blinked hard. Thought maybe my tired eyes were conjuring ghosts out of the storm. But no, they were real. The snow whipped against their fur, but they didn't flinch. Their amber eyes glowed not with anger, but with something rawer, desperation. For a second my old instinct screamed, "It's a trick, Walter. Wolves don't behave like this. Something's wrong. Get out." But then one of them, the braver one, took half a step forward. He was light-colored, with pale flecks on his ears, and he touched my coat with a trembling paw. He let out the softest whimper. Not of fear. Of pleading. My chest tightened. Wolves don't beg. Yet here they were. I cursed under my breath, turned my gaze to the forest, half expecting hunters or some trap. Nothing. Just the storm. I should have walked away. That's what I'd done for years, kept my distance, stayed uninvolved. But something in those eyes broke through the stone inside me. They turned, darted forward a few steps, then looked back, waiting. Not running away, not luring me, but leading. I muttered, "Damn it, Walter, you're a fool," and followed. The pups, later I would call them Snow and Shadow, guided me uphill through drifts and tangled brush. Every dozen yards they'd pause, glance back, making sure I still followed. My pulse hammered, not just from the climb but from a dread I couldn't name. Then I heard it. A howl, broken, hoarse, more like a sob than a call. We reached a clearing where a fallen spruce lay half buried. And there, at its base, was her. A full-grown she-wolf, fur the color of ash, her body stretched out, eyes open yet dim. Her hind leg was clamped inside an iron trap so rusted it might have been forgotten decades ago. Blood stained the snow in black patches. She didn't growl when I approached. She didn't even try to rise. She only stared at me. Silent. Waiting. The pups rushed to her side, pressing against her body, licking her muzzle, their tiny whines cutting through the storm. My knees gave out, dropping me into the snow. My hands shook. My heart felt like it had been dragged back into that fire 15 years ago. "What the hell are you doing, old man?" I muttered to myself. But even as I said it, I was already tearing off my gloves and pulling the knife from my belt. The trap was brutal. Steel teeth sunk deep. I shoved the blade in, trying to pry it open. The metal snapped my knife clean in half. I cursed, used my ski pole as leverage, then my belt. My hands bled, one finger sliced open to the bone. Still I kept pushing, gritting my teeth until finally, the trap groaned and released. The she-wolf whimpered softly, the sound of pain mixed with relief. The pups pressed harder against her side, one even climbing onto her chest as if to shield her. And me? I realized I was crying. Not sobbing. Just tears, silent and hot against my wind-burned cheeks, falling for the first time in 15 years. I ripped the lining from my coat, bound her wound as best I could, sliding fur beneath her leg for padding. Snow curled on one side, Shadow on the other, their small bodies pressed tight against her. She no longer looked at me as a threat. She just accepted me. I slumped back against a tree, lungs burning from the cold air, but inside something warm stirred. Something I thought had been burned to ash with Daniel. I whispered into the storm, though the pups couldn't understand. I didn't save you, son. I wasn't fast enough. But maybe this time I did something right. The storm eased. Snow fell softer, as if the sky itself had grown tired of throwing knives and was now only weeping. I gathered the she-wolf carefully into my arms. She weighed far less than she should have, light with blood loss and suffering. Every step back up the slope felt like carrying a mountain. Behind me, Snow and Shadow followed, never straying, never silent. And for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. Carrying her up the ridge was hell. My arms trembled, my back screamed, but I wouldn't let her drag across ice or brush. She was almost weightless, not because she was small, she was large for a she-wolf, but because blood loss had hollowed her. The pups trailed close, Snow trotting ahead, ears forward, Shadow always behind, glancing over his shoulder as if guarding the rear. I whispered their names in my head. Snow, the hopeful one. Shadow, the careful one. Together they mirrored the two halves of me, the man I once was and the man I had become. It took nearly an hour to reach the old fire watch station. The place had been abandoned for decades, a wooden deck perched on a rocky outcrop, once used by rangers to scan the forest for smoke. I'd patched it up over the years, stocking dry wood, birch bark, and an old stone hearth. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. I laid the she-wolf, later I would call her Luna, on my coat near the fire pit. My hands shook as I struck steel against flint, but the flame caught quick. Soon the room filled with crackling warmth. The pups pressed against her, one curled against her ribs, the other wedged between her paws, muzzle rising and falling with her shallow breaths. I sat watching them, and for the first time in 15 years I didn't feel hollow. I felt part of something. Hours passed. The storm outside howled against the station walls. My eyes grew heavy, but a noise jolted me awake. It wasn't the wind. It was steps. Heavy, soft, deliberate. I grabbed my hunting knife, the only thing left of my gear, and doused the lantern. My eyes adjusted to the pale glow of the snow. And then I saw them. Two green eyes gleamed in the dark. A wolf. A big one. Mel. His head broad, his body massive, scar notched across his muzzle. Alpha, no doubt. He stood only 30 feet from the deck, watching. Not advancing. Not growling. Just watching. My pulse pounded. He could smell the blood. He could sense Luna inside. Behind me, Snow stirred. He rose, padded toward the edge of the deck, and then, unbelievably, stood upright on his hind legs. His paws pressed together the same way he had done with me. He wasn't asking me this time. He was asking him. Shadow joined, mimicking his brother, head bowed slightly, paws together. I felt the hair on my arms rise. My breath stuck in my throat. The alpha growled low, the sound like thunder rolling through the timber. My hand tightened on the knife, though I knew it was useless. And then he stepped back. One pace. Another. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Grief? Respect? Before vanishing into the tree line, I let out a ragged breath. My knife clattered to the floor. I knelt, resting my hands on the pups' heads. They leaned into my palms, their tiny chests heaving. "You're not just animals," I whispered. "You're better than us." The fire crackled. Luna's breathing steadied, rough but rhythmic. Snow and Shadow curled back against her side. I sat awake long after, staring at the flames dancing golden across their fur. And then just before dawn another sound came. Not paws. Boots. I stiffened, reaching for my knife again. Through the trees a figure emerged. Tall, shoulders squared, a heavy khaki jacket with a patch of the U.S. Forest Service stitched at the chest. An orange rescue pack swung across her back, carabiners clinking in the cold. Her blonde hair was tied in a tight ponytail beneath a fur-lined hat. My heart lurched. I knew that face. "Uncle Walter?" she called, voice firm but steady. It was Claire Briggs, my niece. 30 years old now. An environmental engineer, trained veterinarian, sharp-eyed and stubborn to her core. 6 years ago, our last conversation had ended in a shouting match. She had called me a coward for walking away from the fight. I had told her the forest doesn't forgive heroes, it devours them. That was the day she left for good. And now she was here. "You're alive," she said flatly, not loosening the straps of her pack. I grunted, "And you thought I was a stone." She stepped closer and froze. Her eyes fell on Luna, then the pups. Her mouth opened but no sound came. "You brought them here?" she finally managed. I shook my head. "No. They brought me." She dropped to her knees without hesitation, pulled a headlamp from her pack and clicked it on. Her hands moved quick, practiced. She parted Luna's fur, checked her breathing, examined my crude bandage. "Good work for an old man," she muttered. "I'm no hunter anymore," I said quietly. The pups stirred, noses twitching at her scent. At first they bristled, but then Snow inched forward, pressing his muzzle into her hand. She froze, staring at him, eyes wide. "They're not afraid," she whispered. "They asked for help," I said. She looked at me, then really looked, and for a flicker of a second the ice between us cracked. From her pack she pulled out a tablet, GPS maps lighting her face. She tapped the screen, then spread a paper map across the floorboards. "You found her here?" she asked. I pointed at a spot northeast, where the ridge curved down into a gulch. Her jaw clenched. There were footprints. Not animal. Heavy boots. Military tread. Size 12 or 13. Someone set that trap deliberately. I stayed silent. She dug deeper into her pack, pulled out a folder of grainy black and white photographs. One face stared back at me, sharp, gaunt, with eyes that squinted in calculation. "Samuel Kearns," she said. Ex-hunter. Convicted for poaching. Banned for life. Did time. Disappeared. A month ago, sightings near this very ridge. I studied the photo a long time before answering. Men like him don't care about animals. They only care about proving they're stronger. She nodded once, then set her pack down by the fire. Outside, the wind had calmed, the storm thinning into silence. Inside, for the first time in years, my cabin wasn't just filled with smoke and solitude. It was filled with life. Wolves. My niece. Fire. And I knew, whatever was coming next, this was only the beginning. If this moment moved you, leave a comment and let us know what you would have done. Your support keeps these stories alive. By dawn, Claire had already rigged a signal beacon. She always carried one, standard rescue gear. She muttered something about drones picking it up, about backup heading this way. I barely listened. My eyes stayed on Luna. Her breathing was rough but steady. By mid-morning we were moving again, Luna on a makeshift stretcher I lashed together from spruce poles and an old tarp. Every step was careful, deliberate. Snow trotted ahead, ears sharp, while Shadow circled behind, silent and watchful. We reached the small wildlife rehab station on the outskirts of town by noon. A squat wooden building with peeling gray boards, once used for elk and raptors injured by poachers. These days it looked tired, but it was still alive. Dr. Irene Grant came to meet us at the door. 50-something, broad-shouldered, with a fiery streak of red in her hair tied back in a knot. Folks called her Steel Irene. Not because she was cold, but because she never cracked under pressure. She'd once been a field surgeon in Arctic rescue missions, patching men up in the snow. Her husband had died in a crash years ago. Since then, this station had become her fortress. Inside. "Now," she barked, "no time for greetings. Luna was laid on a steel table under sterile lights. Snow pressed to the glass door, paws raised. Shadow leaned against my leg, eyes fixed on the room. Irene's hands moved fast, assisted by Claire. Scalpel. Gauze. Forceps. Blood slicked the table, and my stomach knotted as if I were watching Daniel again, helpless, unable to drag him from the fire. Snow pawed harder at the glass. Then, unbelievably, he rose again on hind legs, front paws pressed as though praying. Shadow joined him. The sight made even Irene pause mid-motion. She whispered, "These pups, it's like they understand." I pressed my palm against the glass, and Snow placed his tiny paw against it. Shadow pressed into my knee. I pulled out an old pocketbook I used to read to Daniel. Robert Frost's poems, pages crinkled, margin notes faded. My voice cracked as I began to read aloud, more to myself than to them. "Whose woods these are, I think I know." The pups stilled, listening, eyes fixed on me. Their tiny bodies eased as if the rhythm of words settled them. 2 hours later, the door opened. Claire pulled down her mask, eyes exhausted. "She'll live," she said. "But the joint's destroyed. She'll limp forever. Better a limp than the grave." I nodded. Snow yipped softly, tail twitching. Shadow pressed closer, silent as always. Irene stepped out last, peeling off her gloves. We stabilized her. Splints on. Antibiotics running. "She'll make it." But, she looked at me hard. This wasn't an accident. That trap was freshly set. Someone wanted a kill. Claire didn't hesitate. She dropped a chunk of rusted steel on the table, the mangled jaw of the trap. Alloy steel. Illegal for decades. But I know who still uses it. "Kearns," I muttered. She nodded. "He's out there. And he'll set more." Irene's eyes narrowed. "Then stop him before he cripples half the forest." That afternoon we packed light gear, thermal blankets, a thermos, 2 portable trail cameras. Claire carried a tranquilizer pistol she'd built herself, a silent weapon that fired steel darts tipped with sedative. She checked it twice, her jaw clenched. "What about them?" I asked, nodding at Snow and Shadow. "They come," she said firmly. "They know the forest better than us." By noon we were deep in the timber again, moving slow, deliberate. The air was brittle, the kind of cold that snaps branches like glass. Snow and Shadow padded silently ahead, pausing often, ears twitching at sounds too faint for me to hear. After hours of trudging, Snow froze. His fur bristled, tail rigid. He gave a low growl. Claire raised a hand, "Halt." We crouched behind a ridge as she activated one of the cameras we'd set earlier. The screen flickered, grainy at first, then clear. A man stood there. Stocky, mid-50s, camo jacket, hood low. He bent over a trap, setting fresh bait, a skinned hair tied above steel jaws. His movements were confident, practiced. "Kearns." Claire's voice was a whisper. "That's him." I stayed silent. My chest burned with old rage. 15 years ago, after Daniel's death, I'd gone looking for someone to blame. I almost shot a poacher then, my rifle aimed and finger on the trigger. I'd given it up afterward, too close to losing myself. And now here he was, another man of steel jaws and careless cruelty. We crept closer, every step careful. Snow darted left, circling. Shadow stayed close to me, his flank brushing mine. But the wind betrayed us. It shifted. Kearns stiffened, turning. His eyes narrowed. Snow lunged from the left, growling, not attacking, just drawing attention. Kearns cursed, stumbling back. Shadow darted to the right, blocking the trail, his tiny frame braced like a soldier. Kearns reached for his knife. The dart hit him square in the shoulder. He staggered, snarled, tried to lunge, but his knees buckled. He collapsed face first in the snow, body twitching as the tranquilizer took hold. Claire lowered her pistol, exhaling. 30 seconds. He'll be out cold. I walked slowly to his side. His hood had fallen back, revealing that same thin-lipped smirk I'd seen in the photo. Even unconscious, his face radiated arrogance. Claire bound his hands tight, then glanced at me. "We've got him." Snow trotted to her side, tail wagging once. Shadow pressed against my boot, eyes locked on Kearns. Me? I stood there staring at the man. I expected anger, fire, the old rage to boil. Instead, I felt something different. Cold. Clear. For the first time in years, my hands didn't itch for violence. The pups had taught me something. They had begged without words. They had believed. And now, standing over the man who thought he ruled the forest, I realized belief was stronger than his cruelty. We dragged Kearns back toward the station on a sled. Snow padded ahead, tail high. Shadow trotted silent at my side. The forest was quiet, as if it too was watching. Kearns came to with a curse on his lips and steel in his eyes, the kind that thinks the world owes it a win just for surviving this long. We handed him over to county deputies by dusk. Claire said very little, jaw clenched. I said even less. Snow and Shadow stood by Luna's enclosure when they carted him off, and for a small, dangerous moment, I almost wished wolves carried gavels. The hearing was quick by mountain town standards. Hunters, ranchers, hikers, biologists, half the county showed up. Some folks have lost calves to wolves. Others have rescued fawns from frozen creeks. Out here the arguments are old and loud. But what Kearns did was different. Illegal traps. Freshly set. A pattern of cruelty. Claire's camera footage told the story better than any of us. Irene's lab notes, metal composition by distances, tissue damage, made the science unmistakable. The judge wore hair like a snowfield and glasses that hung low. She read every line as if it were scripture. Samuel Kearns, she said, voice steady, you're guilty of multiple violations of state and federal wildlife statutes. I'm sentencing you to 2 years suspended, 5 years probation, a lifetime hunting ban, restitution to the rehab station, and 1,000 hours of community service in wildlife conservation. One more violation and you see the inside of a cell. Kearns smirked at me on the way out. You think you saved something? He hissed. The woods chew up men like you. I didn't answer. For the first time in 15 years, silence felt like strength, not surrender. Back at the station, Luna slept under the warm hum of an infrared lamp. Her bandages smelled of antiseptic and pine. She would live, but the truth was simple. Her left hind leg would never be the same. She could run if she needed to, hobble if she didn't, but out there, miles from help, life punishes every limp. Claire stood at the doorway, eyes on the snow beyond. We can't cage her, she said. No, I agreed. But we can't send her back to die. She turned to me, the set of her shoulders familiar as thunder above a ridge. There's a middle ground. We found it in maps and timber and sweat. A forgotten elk paddock a mile from town. Old posts, chain link, rusted gates, sat where the firs opened to a meandering creek. Over 2 weeks we replaced fence, buried skirt mesh against digouts, felled deadfall for shade and built a den mound with straw and stone. A back gate faced the woods, heavy and double-latched, not to keep wolves in against their will, but to hold back the curious and the foolish. A sign went up on sturdy lumber at the entry. Shared ground sanctuary. No entry without permit. Witness. Learn. Respect. I argued over the second line. Claire added the third. In the end, they belonged together like mountain and sky. Snow and Shadow explored first, circling the creek, splashing feet, chasing each other between spruce shadows as if the world had always been soft. Luna emerged last, slow and elegant, sniffing every post as if memorizing our fingerprints. She stepped into the shallows, lifted her bad leg and looked back once. I swear she nodded. Maybe that's my need to believe speaking. Or maybe belief is a kind of seeing we unlearn. I pulled overtime without pay and slept at the station. Claire took the office couch, her orange rescue pack forever by the door. Irene baked bread like an old ritual on cold days, and sometimes I could tell she did it more for the smell than for the taste. Yeast and heat, a statement against winter. One night, by the glow of a low fire, Claire and I sat without talking. The pups had collapsed in a heap by Luna's side, one pale ear twitching in dreams. Claire opened her laptop and typed a title across a blank page. Forest and People. A dialogue without words. School groups, she said. Small cohorts. Not a zoo. A lesson. I watched sparks climb the flue-like constellations that had somewhere better to be. They'll come for the miracle, I said softly, and leave with the work. Good, she answered. Miracles don't last without hands to hold them. We launched in late winter when the sun was shallow and the road hard as hammered steel. The first kids came from a foothill town with a 2-room library and a fire engine painted older than half their teachers. They wore bright mittens and boots that squeaked. I walked them in 2 lines along the path, speaking low in the way mountains teach us. "Hands to yourselves," I said. Voices like snow. "We're visitors." We came around the bend to the viewing deck. The creek flashed silver under ice. Luna stood on a flat stone in a shaft of pale light, shoulders squared, scar like a mapped river along her thigh. Snow and Shadow hovered close, deeper-chested now, but still young enough to trip over a future. The children murmured, some fear, some wonder. A boy with freckles, all elbows and naughty courage, lifted a hand slowly. "Why are they staying here?" he asked. Before I could answer, a smaller boy stepped forward. He kept his knit cap low and his gaze lower, and the grief on him was a weight that bent even the air. His name tag read Evan. His father had died the past summer in a wildfire that ran 40 miles in a day. I knew the look in his eyes. I had carried it for a decade and a half. "They stay," I said, "because sometimes the wild and the human meet in the middle. Not to tame. To trust." Evan nodded, as if remembering a language he had almost forgotten. He took one more step, then stopped, looking at me for permission. I didn't wave him on. I didn't need to. The mountain made the decision for us. Snow rose first, with that same impossible innocence that had undone me on the trail. He stood on his hind legs, front paws together as if saying grace. Shadow followed, calmer, steady, like a prayer that knows its own shape. They held there, balanced and intent, eyes never leaving the boy. A rustle swept through the deck, teachers, gasps, the soft rumble of awe. I felt my throat close. Every time I had tried to explain what I'd seen that night, words shrank. Now no words were needed. Evan slid to his knees in the snow. He didn't reach out, not even an inch. He only looked, and in that looking poured something I recognized: fear, hope, a begging for the world not to be as cruel as it had been. Snow stepped down, took 3 quiet paces and lifted one paw to Evan's shoulder. Not a push. Not a demand. A touch. Evan's face crumpled and tears cut warm, fierce lines across his cold pink cheeks. "He understands me," he whispered. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a match struck in a long dark room. After the children left, clutching little wooden tokens Claire had burned with a paw print in her garage, I stayed at the fence while dusk pooled low and blue in the timber. Luna limped to the den and settled like a queen accepting a smaller throne with grace. Snow and Shadow disappeared among firs and came back with noses dusted in frost. My breath hung like ghost words. I thought of Daniel, of a July that burned a life in 2, and of a January that stitched it back with ice and fur and stubborn love. "Tomorrow," Claire said softly behind me, "we'll add a second viewing post. And a sign about why traps are illegal. Kids ask good questions. We should have good answers." "Answers are heavy," I said. She bumped my shoulder with hers. "Then we'll carry them together." We kept carrying, through late snow and shorter nights, through thaw and mud slick as soap. Spring came late because of course it did, and the creek sang like it had waited all winter to breathe. News about the sanctuary traveled the slow way, parents telling parents, a ranger's wife telling a church friend, a photo leaking onto a bulletin board. We never chased headlines. We didn't need to. The right ones found us. Kearns showed up twice, court-ordered in an orange vest, hauling brush and mending trail with a crew of high schoolers who swung Pulaskis better than he did. He never looked at me. I never needed him to. That isn't how mercy works. It isn't a trade. It's a place you stand when the ground opens, a decision to build a bridge when a cliff would do. By early summer, Snow and Shadow were taller at the shoulder than my knee, chests broadening, movements sharpening with a purpose that grows in young wolves like a rising tide. They still returned to Luna daily, pressing their faces into her neck, sleeping in a pile when thunderstorms cracked the sky open. Some nights I watched them from the porch as heat lightning stitched blue veins across the clouds and thought, there are families built from blood, and there are families built from a choice. One year to the day after the storm, I rose before first light and packed my old rucksack with the things that made me myself again. thermos, field notebook, Frost's slim book with Daniel's messy notes in the margins, a coil of thin rope that smells like resin, just in case the world asks for hands again. I shrugged on a jacket with a simple patch Claire had stitched, shared ground arched over a pine. I met a group of 6th graders at the trailhead. One girl wore a purple hoodie speckled white from a hurried breakfast donut. She walked too fast, like the mountain might leave her behind. I told her it wouldn't. Mountains are patient even when we aren't. We reached the deck as dawn lit the fir tops with the pale gold of a promise. Luna stood at the water, head high, breath a steady plume. Snow and Shadow paced the bank, alert but unafraid. I felt them sense us and choose not to flee. Every day the choosing matters. Look, I said quietly, more to myself than to the kids. This is what happens when fear doesn't get the last word. I read Frost to them the way I had to the pups through glass and ache. The words sat different now, like they'd learned us while we learned them. When the children left, when the quiet came back and the creek shouldered its way around stones the way it had before any of us were born, I stood at the fence and listened. Sometimes you hear your own life better when you're listening for something else. Claire stepped beside me, hands in her pockets, face split by that grin that only ever comes out when she thinks the world might actually tilt toward good. "Hey," she said. "You know this is working, right?" "What is?" She rolled a shoulder toward the sanctuary, the woods, the mountains stacked to the horizon like chapters of an old story you never finished. "All of it. Us." I watched Snow leap the creek in a clean arc and Shadow follow a beat behind, more careful, still sure. "I used to think the fire took all of me," I said. "Turns out it left room." "For what?" she asked. "For this." Evenings at shared ground end slow. We checked the perimeter. We logged the day, sightings, behavior, any worries inked in tidy lines. We sweep the deck. We lock the gate. And before I turn away I look back. Not to count. To remember. Sometimes, when the last light is thin and the pines stand like a congregation, Snow will lift onto his hind legs and hold still in that posture that remade my life. Shadow will rise beside him, steady as a vow. It isn't a trick. It isn't a show. It's a truth spoken without a word. We're asking. We're trusting. We're here. If you're listening to this where you are, on a bus, washing dishes, drifting to sleep in a city that never knew what a mountain smells like after rain, know this: the world will ask you too. It won't always be dramatic. Maybe it'll be a neighbor's dog lost in a storm, or a kid at the edge of a cafeteria table, or your own heart telling you it can't carry one more silent mile. The asking will sound like a small thing. Don't ignore it. Stop. Turn. Do the simple miracle. If this story found you at the right time, tell me about the moment you chose to stop and help. Leave a comment so someone else finds the courage they've been missing. Share it with a person who needs to hear that trust still changes things. And if you want more stories from the edge of the wild where people and animals meet in the middle, you're welcome here. Snow shifts, Luna breathes, Shadow's eyes catch the last thread of light. The wind moves through the firs and says nothing, which is sometimes the loudest kind of blessing. The old fire in my chest doesn't burn me anymore. It warms. Some miracles look like thunder and trumpets. This one looked like 2 wolf pups standing on hind legs in a blizzard, paws pressed together, asking an old man to be human again. I said yes, and it changed everything.
Bye-bye!